There was supposed to be peace. That's what they all said. It's the diplomats, the council, the old species with their long memories and longer speeches. After the last war, one that cost more than any side cared to admit an agreement was reached. Called it the last treaty, a final promise between the core civilizations. No more war within accord space, no first strikes, no forced expansions, no posturing with fleets on shared borders. Just trade, diplomacy, and silence where silence was needed. Earth signed the treaty, quietly without flourish. We were still the youngest voice in the room then. Barely 2 centuries into interstellar travel, still seen as newcomers, passionate, creative, fragile. The other species admired our spirit but didn't fear our strength. And they never really listened when we said, we prefer peace, but we know how to defend it. The Zorvain Dominion, on the other hand, had been waiting. They signed the treaty too, but their claws were crossed behind their backs. A war-born species, they thrived in control planets conquered, species subjugated, histories rewritten. They hated the treaty, hated the pause it forced, hated that Earth, of all species, was rising in influence through diplomacy instead of domination. To the Zorvain, Earth was a symbol of everything they despised: cooperation, compromise, patience, and so they broke the treaty. They did it in the shadows at first, probing here, skirmishing there. Human scout ships that went missing near the edge of accord space. Mining convoys delayed, then destroyed. Civilian transports found drifting crew gone. Hulls scarred with plasma burns no one claimed responsibility for. We knew. Everyone did. But no one said it, because no one wanted to be the first to speak war into existence again. Until the colony on Ralph's. It was small, peaceful, a garden world on the outer edge of human-settled space. No military bases, no defense grid, just families, farms, and a single orbital station. The Zorvain attacked without warning. They didn't even broadcast a declaration. They came in Force 20 ships. Storm class, each capable of leveling cities. They fired once from orbit. 1 shot. 1 warning, they said. Then they landed. They burned every field. Leveled every shelter. Dragged colonists into holding cells and declared Ralvaris a cleansed asset. Their message to the galaxy was clear. The treaty is over. Their message to Earth was even clearer. You will bend or you will break. They broadcast their invasion in full, proud of it, like a predator puffing its chest. Every species in the Accord saw it. Every channel buzzed with reaction. Most were stunned. Some were silent. But Earth replied with only 5 words. You have made your choice. That's when things started to shift. Earth called back its diplomats. Trade convoys were rerouted. Civilian flights were grounded. Old defense protocols, things not seen since the days of the Soul Rebellion, were quietly brought online. You wouldn't see it unless you knew what to look for. Few stars changing in human-published navigation maps. A black line drawn around the Orion corridor. A sudden silence from stations near the Mars Relay Hub. The Accord met in emergency session. Debates. Rugged some begged Earth not to retaliate, others demanded sanctions against the Zorvain. While the Zorvain ambassador stood proudly, smirking. Behind his faceplate, humans talk of peace, he said. His voice broadcast across 100 systems, but they have nothing to back it. Let them come, and still. Earth said nothing. No threats. No fleets deployed. Just a quiet hum of activity felt. Not seen, but those who knew humans well, those who had fought beside them in past conflicts, began to grow uneasy. Because there's something the galaxy never understood about us. We don't shout. When? We're angry. We get quiet. And when Earth goes quiet, it means the fuse is already lit. They thought we'd beg. That was the plan. The Zorvain believed that by striking fast and striking first, they'd force Earth to its knees. That we'd cry foul to the Council, plead for aid, and agree to whatever humiliating terms they offered. Just to stop the bleeding. But that didn't happen. No cries. No pleas. No reaction at a lat. At least not the one they were expecting. Instead, Earth withdrew, not in fear, in focus. Within days of the rivalry's broadcast, Earth entered what its leaders called Phase Zero. No one outside knew what that meant. Not at first, but things began to change. Merchant routes went dark. Civilian ships were called home. Private corporations were nationalized, not with force, but with a simple message. Your ships are now ours. Your crews are now on standby. Old captain's men and women who'd served in wars that the galaxy had already forgotten were pulled out of retirement. Some were tracked down in colonies so distant their names had been lost to history. They didn't ask questions. They just packed because they knew a signal was sent, one that hadn't been broadcast in over 80 years. A tone. 5 seconds. Long. A single rising frequency. To most people, it meant nothing. But to a certain class of ship, it meant activation. You wouldn't see these ships on any registry. They didn't sit in spaceports. They weren't part of the Earth's Defense Force's public inventory. These were ghost vessels hidden in asteroid belts, buried under moons. Stored inside the hollow cores of dead satellites, codenamed Aegis Protocol, they weren't designed for war in the traditional sense. They were designed for ending wars. And now, they were waking up. Meanwhile, the Zorvain pressed forward. Small raids. Border harassments. Always just enough to provoke, but never enough for the Council to intervene. They knew the Accord was weak. They knew most species would prefer silence over resistance. They laughed. They posted new propaganda. Earth as a planet of frightened farmers. Our ships as rusting relics. Our people as relics of a failed experiment in peace. But not everyone was laughing. Some who had fought beside humans decades earlier sent quiet messages to their leaders. They're not preparing for a war. They're preparing for the last one. Across the galaxy, the shift was subtle but real. A Krith merchant vessel reported an entire human escort fleet vanishing mid-jump, then reappearing 4 minutes later. Fully rearmed and reconfigured. No explanation. No trace of their departure. Tervali diplomat's ship, granted access to Sol under special clearance, was turned away not by weapons, but by a voice. Calm, polite, unshakable. The Sol system is now closed. And for the first time, the galaxy remembered. Earth doesn't shout when it's ready to fight. It disappears by the 3rd week after Ralvarez. Even the Council couldn't ignore it anymore. An emergency vote was held, but it was too late. Earth's seat was empty. Its envoys gone. Its signal channels. Offline, no one in the galaxy knew what was happening behind the quiet veil that had fallen over human space. But some remembered. They remembered Earth's oldest stories, not the ones about technology or trade, but about what happens when humanity is cornered. When our patience runs dry, when our hearts stop hoping for peace and start preparing for something else. And still, the Zorvain kept pushing. They moved a battle group toward the Orion, Cordorth's last major trading line to the central systems. They sent a message ahead, taunting, calling it a routine. Exercise.Earth didn't respond, but something did. A deep space sensor near the edge of the corridor recorded an anomaly, just one. A brief flicker in background radiation. Pulse, measured in rhythmic eggs, exactly 3 seconds apart. Then silence. Again, the Zorvain ships reported nothing unusual. Then one went dark. No explosion. No impact. Just gone. The Dominion called it mechanical failure, but they sent a second group. That one didn't. Disappear, it returned empty. No crew, no explanation, no signs of life, just drifting hulls, scorched in patterns no one could explain, the Council asked. Earth for comment. Earth said nothing. Because by then, we weren't talking anymore. We were finishing what they started. They had names once, not that anyone remembers now, back when they were built before the treaty. For the quiet years they were codenamed after old myths. Leviathan, Wraith, Oblivion, Vigil, and dozens more. Ghost ships, born in secret shipyards, hidden inside fractured moons, or beneath the polar crust of Europa. They were never commissioned for service, never assigned to fleets. They weren't built to defend Earth. They were built in case Earth ever had to remind the galaxy why it had survived everything thrown at it for thousands of years, and now they were waking up. Alien intelligence networks began to detect unusual movements, small changes in gravitational readings near dead sectors, echo trails in deep space, silent sensor pings returning from black zones previously considered lifeless. But there were no ships on record. Nothing transmitted its identification. Nothing requested clearance. And any drone or scout sent to investigate vanished. Some said it was coincidence. Others said Earth was bluffing. No one wanted to believe what the rumors suggested, that Earth had never truly disarmed, that it had hidden its real power behind diplomacy and silence. The Zorvain Dominion laughed at the rumors. They mocked the Council for its cowardice. They called Earth a wounded animal limping through space, bluffing its way through survival. But in the quiet, their admirals began noticing strange things. Their own ships would pass through old sectors and charted areas between trade routes, and their long-range scanners would flicker. Not fail. Just flicker, like something was watching. Their fleets stopped responding as quickly. Their supply lines slowed. Something was moving. Not in force, but with intent. Across the Orion corridor, one of their recon destroyers disappeared. Standard procedure. But the next day, it was found parked. Yes, parked. Perfectly positioned in high orbit around an uninhabited rock. Its systems intact, its hull unscratched, and its entire crew missing. The ship's data logs were wiped clean, except for a single phrase burned into the bridge's main console. You passed the warning. Zorvain sent for ships to investigate. Only 2 returned. One arrived with its crew in full paralysis slive, aware but unable to move. Medics found nothing wrong. The other returned, completely empty, broadcasting Earth's original treaty declaration on a loop, back in the Dominion's capital.
Ow.
The Supreme Warcaster dismissed the events as sabotage, as fear-mongering. But even in their own ranks, fear was growing. The term Ghost Fleet started showing up in intercepted Zorvain transmissions, coded phrases, carefully spoken. Pilots began refusing assignments along human border space. Civilians asked to be relocated. Science teams resigned. They weren't afraid of war. They were afraid of what they couldn't see, because Earth wasn't moving in the open. Earth wasn't mobilizing armadas or waving flags. It was reshaping the space around it. Quietly, the old Terran strategy: let them guess, let them think, let them laugh, until the silence becomes unbearable. In the halls of the Galactic Council, ambassadors whispered privately that maybe the Zorvain had gone too far, that maybe Earth hadn't been posturing, but it was already. It's too late, because the final trigger had been pulled, and the fleet that didn't exist was already on the move. In a cold zone near the collapsed remnants of a failed star, a massive sensor, a ray-long thought abandoned, flared to life, blinked once, twice, and went dark. A single transmission followed, untraceable, undecipherable, just sound, but those who heard it said it. It wasn't a message, it was a tone. And every human captain who had ever served in the black knew what it meant. The Ghost Fleet was no longer preparing, it was en route. The Orion corridor had always been contested space, a thin band of stars connecting the inner human colonies to the wider trade networks of the galaxy, rich in resources, uncomfortably close to Zorvain territory. For years it had been a place of quiet tension, routine patrols, neutral cargo routes, diplomatic blinks between borders, until now. The Zorvain arrived in force. They brought a fleet of 91 ships, battlecruisers, storm frigates, Hunter-class corvettes, the largest show of force they had displayed since the end of the last Galactic War. The Dominion claimed it was a routine exercise, but no one believed that. They weren't there to train, they were there to take. Ralvarez had been the first strike. Orion was meant to be the knockout, and yet as their fleet gathered near the outer edge of the corridor, something felt off there. Sensors worked, but returned strange inconsistencies. Static on frequencies that should have been clear, ghost returns, phantoms of mass signatures that vanished when scanned twice. Ships on long-range tracking that didn't appear visually. Their lead admiral, Warcaster Thulek, dismissed it as cosmic interference. Until the sky changed, it didn't start with a bang, or a ripple, or a hyperspace gate. It started with nothing. One moment, space was empty. The next, it was full. Hundreds of ships, black, silent, still. They didn't drop in, they didn't jump, they were just there. Arranged in a wide arc, spread across the stars like the teeth of a blade. Not glowing, not humming, just waiting. The Dominion fleet scrambled. Scanners lit up, then crashed. Comms were flooded with static. Weapons locked on, then failed to acquire. It was as if the Zorvain ships had gone blind and deaf in the presence of something they couldn't understand. And still, human fleet said nothing. No warning, no threat, just presence. For a moment, Warcaster Thulek stared at the formation on the holo display and said nothing. His officers waited. He had led campaigns that broke empires. His name was whispered in fear across 6 sectors. But now, said nothing, because he knew this wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a show. This was a reckoning. He tried to order a retreat. The command never left his lips, because the first Zorvain Shiphan escort frigate drifting near the edge of the formation simply vanished. No flash, no fire. Just a skip in the feed. One moment it was there, the next. Gone. Not destroyed. Not damaged. Erased. The fleet panicked. Frigates scattered. Cruisers spun on axis. Some began firing blindly into space, hoping to hit something. Anything. They hit nothing, and then the second wave of human ships arrived. Smaller, sleeker, moving with terrifying grace. These weren't vessels of war. These were scalpels. Strike craft designed not to fight, but to end. They weaved between Zorvain ships with impossible speed. One by one, Zorvain systems failed. Drives shut down. Targeting failed. Pilots screamed into broken comms, begging for backup. It never came, because backup was already gone in less than 6 minutes. Half the Dominion fleet had been reduced to silent ships floating lifeless, intact. And empty, the human fleet still hadn't spoken. But then, single transmission broke the silence. Not a demand, not a threat, just a voice. Calm, unmistakably human. Orion is ours. We will go no further. This is your only chance to leave. Da! Message played once, then nothing more. The remaining Zorvain ships didn't retreat. They fled, screaming through fractured jump corridors, leaving half their fleet behind, some adrift, some paralyzed, some simply gone. Back on the Dominion capital world, no one celebrated the operation because it hadn't been an operation, it had been a warning. And now, for the first time in their proud history, the Zorvain Dominion felt something they hadn't in generations. Not defeat, not anger, fear, because they had looked into the sky above Orion, and they had seen the end. In the days that followed the Battle of Orion, though calling it a battle would be generous, the Zorvain Dominion said nothing. Not publicly, not through diplomatic channels, not through backdoor communications. The Dominion, known for its endless broadcasts, its blustering commanders, its near-daily threats to lesser species, went silent, and that silence was louder than anything they'd ever said. Warcaster Thulek was never seen again. Official records claimed he'd been reassigned. Rumors whispered that he'd returned home and locked himself in the great chambers of Refixina, place reserved only for those whose souls were broken beyond repair. His fleet, what was left of it, limped back to Dominion space. Every ship was accounted for. Every crew was not. Some vessels had no signs of damage, no breach in hull integrity, no biological residue of any kind. They were clean, sterile, empty. When engineers pulled flight logs, they found fragments of a message embedded deep in the system, not placed there, but grown into the code. Artificial, intentional, it read, "You should have listened." Those 5 words cracked the foundation of Zorvain. Pride more than any explosion ever could. This wasn't just defeat. It was domination without destruction. And the galaxy took notice. Council meetings resumed in hushed tones. Earth was mentioned now only with quiet deference. The seats closest to the Terran delegation were suddenly never occupied. No one wanted to be the first to provoke. Humanity didn't speak of what had happened, didn't issue demands, didn't release victory statements. They just resumed business, as if Orion had simply resolved itself. But that wasn't what haunted their Zorvain. What haunted them was what they didn't. See, because they never truly saw the fleet. Not all of it. What had appeared above Orion had been enough to cripple them, to show dominance. But satellite records, distorted and corrupted by some kind of scrambling field, hinted at more, much more. There were glimpses, shadows between sensor frames, spatial irregularities that didn't match known. Physics. The fleet at Orion was just the surface. There was something beneath it. A presence. And the worst part, the humans never used it. They never deployed their full strength. They didn't need to. Because the moment the Zorvain saw that fleet, they knew this wasn't a group of hastily assembled ships cobbled together in desperation. This had been planned. Years ago, maybe decades, built in silence, hidden in plain sight, integrated into civilian shipping lanes, buried in asteroid belts, docked inside hollow moons. The Zorvain had mocked Earth for being young, emotional, inconsistent, and all the while, humanity had been preparing for. Day someone pushed too far, the Ghost Fleet wasn't a threat. It was a reminder of what happens when Earth is left no choice. And now, that memory would follow the Zorvain into every future engagement. Every fleet meeting. Every whisper of expansion, because they understood now too late that they'd made a mistake. A mistake you don't make twice. Because the fleet wasn't Earth's answer to war. It was Earth's answer to arrogance. And the lesson was now etched into history, not with weapons, not with blood, but with absence, with silence, with ships that didn't broadcast their names, because they didn't need to, and with enemies who, for the first time, didn't want to be remembered as the ones who challenged Earth, because they already knew. End of that story. They'd seen it above Orion, and they wouldn't survive seeing it again. The galaxy didn't know how to respond. There had been no official war declaration, no call for aid. Everyone felt it. Something had shifted. The Zorvain dominion. Once the loudest voice in every chamber had fallen utterly silent. Their news networks shut down for security reviews. Their trade lanes collapsed. Their envoys stopped showing up to diplomatic functions. No explanation. But they didn't need to give one, because across the stars, the story was already spreading. Not through official reports, but through whispers, through shared recordings. Shaky, fragmented transmissions smuggled off the edge of the Orion corridor. Fuzzy stills of black holes appearing in a pattern too perfect to be anything but deliberate. Audio files with distorted voices, some claiming to be the last words, of Zorvain crews before contact was lost. They're here. It's all around us. They don't fire, they just watch. These fragments traveled faster than truth, and they grew. Species that had dismissed humanity as young, clumsy, overly emotional, paused. Some tried to downplay the rumors, calling it exaggerated. Human theatrics. But others remembered. They remembered the way. Earth had entered the galactic stage. Not with conquest, but with curiosity. And how, time after time, humanity had chosen cooperation instead of domination. That kind of power when it's finally shown carries more weight than any history of violence. On Kareth 9, an independent outpost that had previously denied Earth's access to its ports, a new policy was announced. Humans welcome, no inspections required. On Drosk Prime, the ruling class convened a full planetary council to reevaluate their treaties with Earth. Despite there being no prior conflict between them, and in the high halls of the Galactic Council itself, the delegates met behind closed doors. No public feed, no transcripts. The only record of that meeting was a statement issued afterward. Earth has met all obligations under the Treaty of Accord. The Council recognizes its actions as measured and defensive. We reaffirm Earth's full sovereign rights. It was the shortest ruling ever issued by the Council, and it said more than any speech could, because behind those words was a realization that had rippled through every species. Earth didn't strike first. It never does. But when it strikes back, there is no warning, no build-up, no second chance. This changed everything. Trade negotiations with human corporations were suddenly fast-tracked. Border conflicts involving human settlers mysteriously de-escalated. Requests to observe human military operations, once a curiosity of more powerful nations, were now ignored or quietly rescinded. No one wanted to be seen as too curious anymore. Even Earth's allies began to shift. The Ilrai Confederation, one of Earth's oldest trade partners, began offering full military cooperation, not out of need, but as a gesture of trust. "Know what you're capable of," their high speaker said, "and we'd rather be beside you than across from you." It wasn't just respect now, it was alignment. Because power that doesn't ask to be feared often becomes the most feared of all. Humanity didn't issue demands. They didn't rewrite the rules. They simply went back to work, back to building, exploring, connecting. But now, wherever a human ship passed, space seemed to bend a little. Quieter. On deep space docks, human captains were offered priority lanes without requesting them in council chambers. When a human ambassador stood, no one interrupted. On military frequencies was a new code. Echo Blacka silent alert. That meant simply human fleet activity. Do not engage. It was a quiet revolution, one not led with missiles or invasions, but with restraint, with clarity, with one brutal, unforgettable lesson. You can test a species once, maybe even twice, but Earth only allows you that mistake once, and the galaxy had taken its turn. Now it would live with the memory. The fleet didn't have a name at first, not officially. It wasn't filed under any public directive. No mention in the Unified Defense Charter, no press releases, no budget hearings. It was hidden so well that most Earth citizens never even knew. It existed, but the right people knew. The kind of people who didn't deal in politics, who didn't give speeches, the kind who knew how close. Earth had come to extinction in its early days among the stars. The fleet was born not from pride, but from paranoia, because in those first years when humans first stepped into deep space, we weren't welcomed. We were studied, measured, dismissed, and once or twice tested. Earth survived those encounters, barely, but the lesson stuck. If it ever happens again, we won't be caught unprepared. And so, in the shadows of bureaucracy, behind decades of silence and misdirection, humanity began building something that was never supposed to see the light. Project Aegis, a fleet built not to patrol, not to parade, not to show off, but to wait. And if necessary, to end the next war before it truly began. The earliest ships were small experimental, cloaked testbeds with prototype drives and sensor masking holes, crewed by volunteers who never used their real names. Pilots selected from the most disciplined and quiet operators in Earth's long and troubled military past. As Earth's role in galactic politics expanded, so did the fleet. Every time Earth signed a new trade deal, a new warship was built under a false project number. Every time a human ambassador was insulted or dismissed, another ship went into silent orbit around a lifeless rock. The galaxy saw peace, but Earth planned for war, and the planners didn't just consider conventional threats. They thought bigger. More quietly, they built ships that didn't need to fire to win. They designed systems that could disable enemy fleets with targeted, MP-lace netting. They developed strike craft that moved faster than most sensors could register and inserted human retrieval teams before a ship even realized it had been boarded. But most terrifying of all was how little of the fleet had actually been seen. What the Zorvain witnessed at Orion, those black ships drifting silently into formation, was only a fragment. According to declassified records made available long after the fact, Earth launch that day represented less than 1/3 of its actual strength. The rest, still waiting, still watching, still unseen. Because Project Aegis wasn't a reaction to the Zorvain. It was a contingency. A silent question asked by generations. Of Earth's leaders, what if the day comes when they forget we tried peace first? The fleet was the answer, and in a way, it had already done its job long before it arrived over Orion. Because the power of Aegis was never just in what it could do. It was in what it made others think it might do. Fear without fire. Surrender. Without slaughter, the perfect deterrent. And after it was deployed, Earth didn't keep it active. It disappeared again. Scattered, cloaked, disbanded into pieces. Some ships returned to their hidden stations. Others simply vanished from registry altogether. When asked about it, Earth's leaders simply said, "We have resumed normal operations." That was all. But every admiral and every alien fleet now lived with one simple, silent question. Where are the rest of them? Right. Because they knew Orion wasn't an outburst. It wasn't vengeance. It wasn't even the full measure of Earth's wrath. It was a sample. A shadow of a shadow. And if provoked, again. The next time might not come with a warning. The next time, the sky might open, and there would be nothing left but silence. The stars didn't change. They still burned in the black, far and silent. The galaxy still spun, full of its empires and its trade routes, stations and cities and laws. But the way the galaxy looked at those stars did change. Because now, wherever a system scanned the heavens, wherever a ship crossed into deep space, there was a pause, a hesitation, a memory, not of war, but of what almost was. They remembered Orion. They remembered the fleet. And they remembered the silence. No species spoke of it openly anymore. Not in council chambers, not in the markets, not on public broadcasts. But behind closed doors, it was always there. The unspoken rule. Don't provoke the humans. Not because Earth demanded it. Not because of treaties or threats, but because of what they'd seen. It was the first time. The galaxy had faced a species that didn't answer disrespect with rage or chaos. Humanity. Didn't boast. It didn't conquer it. Didn't posture. It waited. And then, when pushed too far, it moved with a precision and finality that shattered the illusion of galactic superiority, because Earth had never been weak. It had simply been kind. And when kindness was mistaken for cowardice, the lesson had to be taught. Now, the lesson had taken root. The Zorvain Dominion, what remained of its leadership, had redrawn its borders. Quietly, without formal surrender. They stopped broadcasting threats. They stopped mocking. They didn't even issue new diplomatic statements because they didn't want to say the wrong thing. The council updated its military readiness scale. A new level was added. Echo Level Red. Translation: if Earth mobilizes, stop everything. Other species adjusted their fleet deployments, not closer to Earth, but further away. Human exploration ships were given more space at starports, customs inspections, suspended security clearances. Pre-approved, all without Earth asking. All because of what they now understood and back on Earth. Nothing changed. Humans went on with their lives, building, farming, inventing, teaching. The Black Fleet returned to its shadow. It wasn't needed anymore, not because the galaxy loved Earth, but because it respected it, and respect once earned. This doesn't fade easily. There were still wars, still arguments, still petty politics between species, but no one laughed at humanity anymore. Not after what they saw, not after what they almost woke up for real. In time, the stories became quiet folklore, tales told in whisper across alien academies and war colleges. If you see the sky darken and the stars blink twice, you may already beamed there, beneath that tale, always sat the oldest truth. Earth speaks softly, but when it moves, it ends things. Now they watch the skies differently, not in fear, not in submission, but in memory. Because somewhere, out there, the ships are still waiting, and Earth is still listening.